The 1970s were a wild decade for motorcycles. Manufacturers from Japan, Europe, and the United Kingdom competed to build the fastest bike. Safety, comfort, and handling were not a priority. Every bike wanted to be the fastest instead. Motorcycle tech exploded, disc brakes showed up, engines grew bigger and meaner, and the first true superbikes were born. Here are the 15 fastest 1970s motorcycles ever made. Starting with the Kawasaki Z1. If you were alive in 1972 and didn't want to ride the fastest motorcycle on Earth, congratulations on being boring. The Kawasaki Z1 was the fastest bike of the 70s, and the bike that made every British engineer cry into their tea. This was the original Japanese superbike. 4 cylinders, double overhead cams, 903cc, 82 horsepower. These were numbers that made Harley and Triumph look like Grandpa's lawnmower. Kawasaki didn't just break the speed record with period tests, clocking it at a legit 132 miles per hour, making it the superbike benchmark and the headache of every traffic cop, from California to Kent. But the Z1 wasn't just about speed. It was bulletproof and reliable. You could redline it all day, drop it in a ditch, and it'd fire right back up, ready to embarrass your friend's CB750. The handling was 1970s adequate, meaning straight lines were your friend and corners were just suggestions. The Z1 became a cult legend because it shoved motorcycling into the modern age. It's the reason every superbike since has had to bring actual firepower, not just a loud exhaust. The only thing this bike didn't have was mercy. If you wanted fast in the 70s, you bought a Z1. If you didn't, you lost. Another Kawasaki, the KZ1000. If the Z1 was Kawasaki's nuclear bomb, the KZ1000 was their precision-guided missile. Launched in 1977, this was the sequel that actually didn't suck. It was a bigger, meaner Z1 with everything cranked up except the weight, which, to no surprise, went up too. The engine grew to 1015cc and was tuned for a bit more torque, but don't kid yourself. The KZ1000 was still about one thing: obliterating straight lines. The top speed was the same as the Z1, 132 miles per hour on a good day, and every magazine tried to shave another decimal just to claim theirs was the fastest. They all clocked the KZ1000 just a whisker under or at the magic number, with a best run of 132 miles per hour. In the real world, that means you're tearing past everything short of a Porsche 911 unless you eat wind for breakfast. But here's the dirty truth. For all its muscle, the KZ1000 didn't fix the Z1's handling quirks. The chassis was still a flexi garden gate, and the brakes were more a polite suggestion than an actual stopping device. But on the highway, nobody cared. The KZ1000 became the cop bike of choice and the backbone of every street racer's wet dream. If you wanted 70s speed with a dash of law enforcement cred, this was your iron horse. Up next, the Suzuki GS 1000S. Suzuki finally woke up in the late 70s, took one look at the Kawasaki Z1 and KZ1000 and said, "We can do that, but with less drama and more style." The GS 1000S was based on the GS 750. This wasn't some poser cafe racer with stickers and empty promises. Under the blue and white paint was a 997cc, air-cooled 4 pumping out 90 horsepower and capable of, wait for it, 132 miles per hour. Yep, that number again. Welcome to the Superbike arms race. The GS 1000S was the first Suzuki Big Bore 4 that didn't handle like a greased walrus. It was fast, but also genuinely rideable in corners, something its Kawasaki rivals struggled with after about 4 beers and a blindfold. Suzuki stiffened the frame, sharpened the suspension, and finally gave riders brakes that actually worked when you stomped on them. Testers in 1979 were floored. You could wring its neck all day, hit 132 miles per hour on a highway blast, then throw it into a curve and not immediately pray to the gods of crash repair. The GS 1000S was the bike that proved Suzuki was done being the punchline and ready to go toe-to-toe with the fastest on the street. It may not have rewritten the record books, but it made sure nobody else was safe at the top. 10th on the list, Honda CBX 1000. If the 1970s had a look-at-me machine, it was the Honda CBX 1000. This was Honda flexing on everyone, with 6 cylinders sticking out like chrome antlers, 1047cc of shrieking mechanical excess, and 105 horsepower. The CBX was built to be fast as well as engineered to make everyone else look old, slow, and underdressed. Honda claimed over 130 miles per hour, and real-world tests from Motorcyclist and Cycle clocked it at a genuine 131 miles per hour. Unlike most other bikes that were mostly just straight-line missiles, it was surprisingly smooth and, for a beast this size, shockingly civilized at speed. But let's be honest, nobody cared about comfort. If you wanted something like this, you wanted and bought this thing to make a noise like the apocalypse, and to laugh at every other four-cylinder peasant you dusted at the lights. The handling was ambitious, and the bike was so wide that you could use it as a family dinner table. At 600 pounds wet, it took real conviction to throw it into a corner. But no one really cared, because it wasn't for carving up twisties. It was for showing up, shutting up the competition, and leaving a trail of stunned onlookers behind. Think of the CBX 1000 as the ultimate 70s muscle flex. It was big, brash, and built to let everyone know Honda was still the boss. Next up, the Lavareggiata 1000. Here's where Italian ego meets physics and loses, but loses with style. The Lavareggiata 1000 was fastest production motorcycle in the world, if you believed Laverda's marketing, which, let's be honest, was written by someone mainlining espresso. The factory bragged about a 140 miles per hour top speed, but every real test, whether British, American, or Italian, clocked it between 130 and 132 miles per hour. Welcome to the 1970s, where numbers are as stretchy as spandex. Still, don't let the hype overshadow the bike. The Giotto was a big, brutal 981cc triple that sounded like a thunderstorm inside a cement mixer. With 90-plus horsepower and a tank-like chassis, it was built to hammer down the Autobahn all day without coughing up its crankshaft. You're probably wondering about its reliability, and at this point, it'll be best to remind you that it was Italian, so it mostly finished the race. Again, though, many buyers were not discouraged. Nobody cared because it looked and sounded like it belonged in a beer commercial. The handling was leagues better than any Japanese rival, thanks to decent suspension, and a frame that didn't flex like a pool noodle at speed. But you needed the wrists of a gorilla and a wallet for Italian maintenance bills. This bike was good at making you feel fast and maybe a little reckless, because riding one was proof you'd chosen violence over comfort. The Honda CB 900F was Honda's wake-up. Honda looked at the CBX 1000's six-cylinder circus, shrugged, and decided to get serious. The CB 900F was, in response, less showboating and more action. The CB 900F was a proper street weapon, with 901cc, 4 cylinders, 95 horsepower, and a tested top speed of 130 miles per hour. There was no goofy six-pack engine, no novelty chrome. All you felt and saw was cold, calculated speed. This was also Honda's answer to the Big K Kawasaki's and Suzuki's GS range. The CB 900F didn't waste time with exaggerated marketing, and instead, it quietly crushed rivals with bulletproof reliability, tight handling, and enough grunt to leave most things behind at the lights. On a good day, it'd crack 130 miles per hour, and even on a bad day, you were still blowing the doors off anything British or American and making life miserable for BMW and Ducati fanboys. The handling was something from the 70s that didn't try to kill you in every corner. The CB 900F also came with a beefier frame, decent forks, and dual discs up front, so you could actually brakey and turn, not just pray. This bike was the bridge between the old-school superbike chaos and the sharper, more refined machines of the 80s. It was the smart, ruthless killer in a room full of loudmouths, not the most famous, but arguably the most grown-up. Up next, Kawasaki Z1R. The Kawasaki Z1R was the Z1's stylish, I gotta pay raise cousin, considering it was leaner, meaner, and dipped in metallic blue with a factory cafe fairing bolted on. Underneath, it was still the same Z1 bloodline, 1015cc, 4 cylinders, and enough attitude to get you banned from most church parking lots. The marketing promised a sharper, faster ride, but in reality, the Z1R just about squeezed out 136 miles per hour, matching the KZ 1000 and Z1 in a dead heat, but with more flair. The fairing was supposed to make it an aerodynamic bullet, but in truth, it just made you look faster while doing the same speed as last year's model. Magazine testers did clock it at a hair under 135 miles per hour, but unless you were built like a jockey and had a hurricane as your tailwind, that was the practical ceiling. What set the Z1R apart was its attempt at sophistication. It had disc brakes all around, a slightly revised frame, and wheels that were squarely aimed at the sports crowd. Did it finally fix Kawasaki's cornering problems? Not really, because the chassis was still about as rigid as overcooked spaghetti. Regardless, the Z1R looked like it was doing 100 standing still. If you wanted to roll up at the disco and leave rubber on the tarmac after, this was your bike. The Suzuki GS750 is next. Don't let the 750 fool you. This thing was a wolf in a sea of four-stroke sheep. When Suzuki dropped the GS750 in 1976, everyone expected another slow, heavy Japanese lump. Instead, they got a bike that could embarrass bigger machines, clocking a real 126 miles per hour flat out. For a mid-sized bike, that was borderline witchcraft. The GS750 was Suzuki's first real four-cylinder four-stroke, and they didn't phone it in. You got 68 horsepower, a screaming 9,250 revolutions per minute redline, and the kind of reliability that made British bikes look like disposable razors. Another boon that this bike offered was that it could actually handle corners. Suzuki reinforced the frame, dialed in the suspension, and gave it brakes that worked even when you used them more than once in a row, which basically was a novelty for the era. It didn't make the same headlines as the leader bikes, but on the street, the GS750 was a silent assassin. It was faster than it had any right to be, shockingly stable in corners, and willing to take as much abuse as you could throw at it, day after day. It was the bike that proved you didn't need 1000cc and a death wish to be fast in the 70s. Then the Ducati 900 SS. Ducati's 900 SS is the bike that made Desmodromic a buzzword and gave Italian sport bikes their street cred. On paper, Ducati claimed it could do 130 miles per hour, but in the real world, the best road testers squeezed out 125 miles per hour flat out, hunched over the tank, praying the bevel drive twin wouldn't explode or start leaking oil like a colander. But here's the thing, nobody bought a 900 SS just to drag race. This was the thinking man's superbike, with 863cc L-twin, 80GP, and a chassis that made Japanese rivals feel like wobbly furniture. If you could deal with the quirks, kicking it to life, waiting for the oil to heat up, and enduring a ride like a medieval torture device, you got a bike that felt fast everywhere, not just at top speed. The 900 SS was razor-sharp in corners, brimming with character, and looked like it belonged on the Le Mans grid. Since it was Italian, though, you needed to have a toolkit for a best friend. But when it ran, nothing sounded, steered, or drew a crowd like it. Sure, it lagged a few miles per hour behind the Japanese juggernauts in a straight line, but it more than made up for it in soul and swagger. This was the 70s superbike for riders who cared more about apexes than drag strips. At number 10, the Moto Guzzi Le Mans 850. Moto Guzzi's Le Mans 850 was Italy's middle finger to Japanese dominance. A brawny V-twin, built for fast roads, bad decisions, and a lifetime of left-lane living. The factory claimed 130 miles per hour, but testers found the real number was a tick under 125 miles per hour. A bit of marketing optimism, but it still meant this was one of the fastest, most charismatic bikes of the decade. This thing looked like it was sculpted by a Bond villain, slab-sided, low, and long, with a fuel tank made for tucking in at speed. The engine was a 844cc transverse V-twin, air-cooled, chugging out 71 GP. It was a torque monster, with gobs of grunt at any RPM, with a sound that made British twins whimper and Japanese fours seem clinical. The Le Mans 850 wasn't just about top speed, it handled brilliantly for a shaft-drive bike. It was solid, planted, and had Brembo brakes that actually stopped you before the next continent. It was also very reliable and would keep running through rain, sleet, or nuclear fallout, as long as you kept the valves in check and didn't treat maintenance like a rumor. If you wanted to blow minds at the local cafe and shame your friends on the autostrada, this was your ticket. And next on the list, the BMW R90S. The BMW R90S was the bike that finally convinced the world BMW didn't just make motorcycles for old men in tweed, if that was even a thing. In the world of 70 speed, it was the refined assassin, giving off a vibe that said, sophisticated but deadly. With an air-cooled boxer twin, 898cc, and a modest 67 horsepower, it could still top out at 124 miles per hour, a shocker for anyone who thought German bikes were all bark and no bite. But let's be blunt, it wasn't the fastest on paper, but it was definitely fast enough to blow the doors off any British relic, and it could keep up with most Japanese four-cylinders once the road got twisty. The R90S was the bike that invented the sport touring class with its shaft drive, a wind-cheating bikini fairing, disc brakes, and that signature Daytona orange paint job that looked like it had been dropped in radioactive soup. But the real magic was in the way it handled. Where most superbikes of the era flexed like cheap furniture, the R90S stayed composed, stable, and drama-free, mile after mile. It was fast, but also civilized, and you could cross countries at triple-digit speeds without feeling like your spine had been through a blender. The R90S wasn't the loudest or wildest, but it was the bike that made fast feel grown up. Next up, Yamaha XS 1100. Yamaha's XS 1100 was the heavyweight brawler of the 70s superbike wars. A big, unapologetic bruiser built for going fast in a straight line and daring you to stop it. Its power came from a 1,101cc engine, and this air-cooled 4 was the biggest production four-cylinder of its day, cranking out 95 horsepower and a tested top speed of 125 miles per hour. This thing was a hammer looking for a nail, and it did not give a rat's bum about finesse. The XS 1100 could out-drag almost anything at the stoplight, but calling it nimble would be a cruel joke. It weighed more than some small cars and cornered with all the grace of a refrigerator on roller skates. But that didn't matter to the American market, which wanted maximum speed, comfort, and a bike that looked like it could tow a yacht. For all its mass, the XS 1100 was surprisingly civilized. Shaft drive for easy maintenance, triple disc brakes that actually worked, and a seat so plush you'd swear it was stolen from your grandma's sofa. Its reliability was the kind that one typically expected of Yamaha. When you rode it hard, when you neglected it, when you pushed it, it would still forgive you. Nobody raced an XS 1100 through the Alps, but on the highway, nothing short of a police roadblock could stop you. If you wanted the fastest couch on two wheels in the late 70s, this was it. The lucky number 13 is the Suzuki GT 750, aka the Water Buffalo. The Suzuki GT 750, nicknamed Water Buffalo, or Kettle if you're British, was the bike that made everyone wonder, wait, they water-cooled what? Launched in 1971, this was Suzuki's three-cylinder, two-stroke Hail Mary in a world that was fast-shifting to four-strokes. It sounded like an angry swarm of chainsaws and left a blue haze thick enough to repel mosquitoes for miles. It maxed out at about 120 miles per hour if you pinned the throttle and believed in miracles. That might sound tame next to the era's four-cylinder monsters, but for a 739cc two-stroke, that was black magic. The GT 750's 67 GP and distinctive water cooling made it the smoothest, weirdest long-distance tourer on the planet. You could ride it all day, every day, without boiling it over, something no Kawasaki triple owner could brag about. The handling wasn't exactly razor sharp. This was a big, heavy bike, happiest chugging along straight highways and scaring small children with its noise, but the brakes were actually decent. The comfort was real, and the weird factor was off the charts. The GT 750 was a glorious, smoky wonder, fast enough to keep up, unique enough to stand out, and proof that Suzuki didn't care about being normal. The next is the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 750. This is the bike your mother warned you about. The Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 750 was outrightly unhinged. Launched in 1972, it packed a 748cc, two-stroke triple that pumped out a wild 74 horsepower. Kawasaki advertised 120 miles per hour, but the real speed was measured in how quickly you could terrify yourself. It got there before you finished the Lord's Prayer, assuming you were brave or stupid enough to keep the throttle pinned. The H2 didn't believe in traction, stability, or mercy. The front wheel lived in the air, the rear tire got vaporized every Saturday night, and the frame handled corners like a jellyfish on rollerblades. Nobody ever accused this bike of being safe. Every magazine called it a widowmaker, and for once, the hype was dead on. It was the 70s fastest production two-stroke, and maybe the most infamous. You only bought the H2 for one reason, to blow off absolutely everything at the drag strip, at least until you ran out of talent or courage. Owning an H2 meant you lived for chaos. The top speed was impressive, but the legend was in how violently it got there. This was the last, greatest middle finger from the era of dangerous fun. Last but not least, the Norton Commando 850. If the Japanese bikes were sledgehammers and the Italians were scalpels, the Norton Commando 850 was a fist with brass knuckles included. By the late 70s, Norton was fighting extinction, having been outgunned, outspent, and nearly out of time. But with the 828cc Commando 850, they gave one last snarl at the superbike arms race, pushing 117 miles per hour flat out. No, it wouldn't dethrone the Z1, but it would still dust most things built before 1970 and sound damn good doing it. The engine was a big, torquey parallel twin, making 60 horsepower and a seismic amount of vibration. Norton's solution was the now legendary isoelastic mounting system, a fancy way of saying the engine shook itself silly while the frame pretended not to notice. It wasn't refined, but it worked. Kind of. Handling was the Commando's party trick, and British journalists swore it was the best cornering big twin of its day. For once, they weren't exaggerating. The bike was light-ish, stable, and genuinely fun to throw into a bend if you didn't mind oil leaks and the occasional electrical tantrum. The Commando 850 was the swan song of the British bike industry. Fast enough, full of character, and absolutely unapologetic about its quirks. It's what you rode if you refused to wave the white flag. Do you remember any old flame of yours that didn't make the list? Tell us in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out our other videos.